What's good, peeps? It's your boy Hes P bringing you another dosage of positive vibes. What is going on, my peeps? As always, if you're new to my channel, welcome to the Positive Vibes Tribe. On this channel, I raise awareness on what it's like living with irritable bowel syndrome, which is a chronic invisible illness, while creating a community of supporters and spreading positive vibes at the same time. I use positivity as a form of medicine to help me either fight away or manage my depression, stress, and anxiety, because these emotional problems can easily and drastically intensify my IBS symptoms. Therefore, I make it a point to practice positivity and spread positive vibes at the same time because I know others could use it as well. So, whether you have IBS, lupus, ADHD, or issues with getting your dog to stop peeing on your couch, whatever your illness or problem is or isn't, everyone is welcome to receive their dosage of positive vibes. Okay, so just like my last video, I put out a poll which many of you voted on for me to share my story about the time IBS made me quit my job on a stretcher. Well, in this video, I'm finally going to share that horrible and traumatic experience with you guys. But before I go on with the story, I want you guys to know that I'm trying out a new format when it comes to my storytelling. So instead of getting a full visual video, you're just going to get the audio when it comes to me telling my story, just so that you guys can be able to move around and multitask while you're listening. However, the intros and outros will be visual, as you can see. The reason for this format is because I want to be able to produce more quality content at a faster rate than I am now. And I'm hoping that it'll be a lot easier to produce, edit, and post with this new format on a consistent basis. I feel like you guys deserve a lot more content from me. But again, I'm the only person running this machine. I mean, I not only create the content, but I edit my own videos, which takes hours and days. I also manage all of my social media accounts and create content for those platforms as well, which, needless to say, all of this is like a full-time job that I don't even get paid for. But I truly enjoy it because I have a deep sense of passion for doing what I do. You guys give me more purpose, and I truly love and enjoy creating content because this is who I've always been my entire life. I am always creating content. So with that being said, I am humbly asking for your help and support to help keep this channel alive and thriving. I finally started a Patreon account where I can create exclusive content for my patrons. I'm assuming many of you know what Patreon is, but in case you don't, Patreon is a place where you can financially support a creator and their channel and help them thrive in their journey. I will post a more formal and detailed introduction to my Patreon account and why I decided to start one in a whole nother video. But for now, I am simply asking for your help. Please go check out my Patreon account and see what kinds of things patrons can get for simply supporting. The link is in the description below. Alright guys, thanks for listening so far, and as usual, you might want to go get a popcorn or a snack because this is going to be quite a long and interesting story. Alright, well, enjoy the video. The time IBS made me quit my job on a stretcher. A real story by Hes P. So, where do I begin? Well, I guess I gotta put things into perspective, right? First, I'm gonna briefly talk about the job I ended up quitting on a stretcher. In other words, I'm gonna briefly talk about what the job was, why I took the job in the first place, the kind of environment I was working in, and then I'll get into what happened with my IBS on the actual day I decided to quit. All these pieces of information is important and should give you guys plenty of context. And please keep in mind that this was a traumatic experience for me. So I'm really making myself vulnerable to tell you guys this story because I truly went through some things back then that I consider embarrassing. And I reacted in ways that I feel wasn't really manly of me. And trust, I get that it's okay for a man to show weakness at times, but I was raised to always have thick skin and be strong no matter what I'm going through. I was taught to man up and not cry for anything. So trying to decondition myself from that mentality to just accepting the fact that it's okay to be vulnerable, not just as a man, but as a human being, is still a huge challenge for me. So I hope you guys will bear with me as I tell this story, and for the sake of privacy and courtesy to others, I will keep out actual names of people and businesses that I plan to talk about. Alright, here we go. So, it's the year 2012, just a couple of years after dropping out of college. I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and I still had no clue what I was suffering from either. I just knew I was constantly dealing with unusual bathroom behavior, intense stomach pain, and nausea. At the time, I was working as a sales rep at a cell phone company, My job was to sell mobile phones and the plans and accessories that came with them. Long story short, it was a decent job because of the experience and skills I was gaining. But I knew I didn't want to sell cell phones forever, and the pay just wasn't the best. I remember my wife and I owning a 1999 black Jeep Cherokee in the year 2012, which is what we could afford because we got it for cheap through an auction, and we both were basically living in her parents' attic at the time. So needless to say, I decided to search for other jobs in hopes that something better than what I was doing would come up because I needed more money. Well, some time went by, and thankfully a friend of mine who knew I was looking for work told me about an opening at her job. Also, my friend told me the job paid very well, so of course I couldn't pass up the opportunity to at least go for an interview. The role was a scheduling coordinator at a nursing rehabilitation center. The following week, I had an interview with the head of human resources and the director of nursing of the rehabilitation center. And long story short, the director of nursing actually wanted to hire me on the spot. In fact, I believe I was the first male scheduler they ever hired. I learned that a scheduling coordinator makes sure that the rehab center is completely staffed with nurses and certified nursing assistants 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I didn't think much of the responsibility because I figured it would be a team or department effort to make sure that the facility is always staffed. And it also turned out that the pay was almost twice as better than what I was making at the cell phone company. Needless to say, I put my 2 weeks in at the cell phone company and accepted the new position at the nursing rehab center as a scheduling coordinator. So the first couple of months as a scheduling coordinator wasn't so bad. There was definitely a big learning curve, but I was getting informal training, which was somewhat helpful. In other words, initially the stresses of the job were somewhat tolerable, and so were my IBS symptoms, which again, I didn't know was IBS at the time. And the pay was great. After some time, I was able to start paying off my school debt on a consistent basis. I was able to take my wife, who was my fiance at the time, out on more expensive dates. I remember I took her to a very nice French restaurant for her birthday one time, and there was jazz playing in the background. We ordered a bottle of wine, a half dozen of oysters, a shrimp platter. I mean, we got the works. And we even leased a brand new 2012 Jeep on that salary. Basically, I was able to take on more financial responsibilities because of this job, and it felt so good. Now, however, after getting to know my boss, some coworkers, and the environment I was working in a little bit better, I was starting to learn it wasn't as great of a job as I initially thought it was. When I finally became more independent in my role, there were certain things about the job that just wasn't sitting well with me and was actually beginning to take a negative toll on my condition and mental health. One of the issues I had was that I was actually the only scheduling coordinator and medical supply person for the entire building, which meant that the stresses of making sure that the rehab center was always filled with nurses and CNAs and stocked with medical supplies was solely put on me, which clearly I underestimated how difficult those responsibilities were at first. I literally took on about 3 jobs and was only getting paid for 1 role. And to be honest, they kind of surprised me with that. Let's just say my IBS was not enjoying being triggered so often. I mean, for you guys to really comprehend the stresses from this job, you also have to understand the environment I was working in. The nursing rehab center I worked in was actually quite understaffed and ill-equipped to train employees properly. I'm a prime example because although I had someone training me, there was still a lot I had to figure out on my own because the person training me was not an official trainer. That wasn't even her job title. However, she was just the only person in the building who knew how to do my job better than anyone else. I also eventually learned that the scheduling and medical supply systems in place were not the greatest, which made it really hard to properly fill in holes in the schedule and properly order and organize the medical supplies. I mean, to make matters even more difficult and stressful, my office was actually a part of the medical supply storage. So imagine the amount of interruptions from nurses and CNAs I had to deal with while trying to do my job effectively. And you know what? I'll let you guys in on a little scoop. Because I work somewhat closely with human resources, I knew that some nurses and CNAs were getting hired with hardly any skills or training. I've experienced and heard stories about nurses and CNAs being extremely careless and unsanitary at that building, which unfortunately made me lose even more trust in some healthcare experts. I mean, with that being said, and with great respect for the patients there were moments I felt like I was working in a circus, and my IBS was starting to get out of control. I mean, out of control. And to make matters even 50 times worse, I had a condescending boss who took advantage of his authority any chance he could. And I say that with no exaggeration whatsoever. The more acclimated I got into my role, the more he felt he could talk to me any kind of way. You know what? Let me try to paint a picture of this guy's personality. The guy certainly suffered from toxic masculinity because behind closed doors, he made many sexist remarks about some of the women who were nurses and CNAs, as if because I'm also a man that I would agree and banter with him. He even had occasions when he made borderline racist remarks, and because he was so caught in his ways, he didn't realize that what he was saying was actually harmful and prejudiced. He tried to make a joke one time about going to an all-black barbershop and being surprised that the barbers were knowledgeable and skilled enough to cut his type of hair. I was surprised that he even felt that comfortable enough to even tell me that. And yes, he was an older white male in his 60s with old point of views, and it became more obvious the more I got to know him. And trust me, this guy is a lot worse than what I'm describing. For instance, when it came to me, this guy was beyond demeaning and very disrespectful at times. There were many times when he would literally call me after work hours. After work hours? I mean times when I'm supposed to be relaxed and not so stressed, right? He would call me and harass me about holes in the nursing schedule that even he with his authority could not fill. This dude would straight up scream at me over the phone and would say things that make me feel like crap, like really worthless and underappreciated. I promise you I'm not exaggerating. This guy was so disrespectful that if it wasn't for my professionalism and if we were out on the streets, boy, I don't know if I would have been able to contain myself. I mean, I probably would have gave him Mike Tyson when he went against Evander Holyfield. Better yet, I would have gave him the Thriller in Manila when Muhammad Ali went against Joe Frazier. Man, you see what happens when I go down memory lane and think about all the issues I had back then? Alright, Hez, chill. Alright, come on, bro. Positive vibes. But seriously though, imagine having a boss like this and not knowing what you're suffering from, and then trying to communicate and explain to this person about what it is you're going through. Let's just say calling off from work whenever my symptoms would get out of control was far from easy to do. Alright, so here we go. The day I actually quit my job on the stretcher due to my IBS, and of course many other reasons. Well, one day at work, I had the worst flare-up I had ever felt. I was feeling unbearable stomach pain, intense nausea, diarrhea, and a whole lot of anxiety and fatigue. And I immediately communicated that to my boss. Needless to say, that probably wasn't the best idea. Well, what did my boss do? He literally ignored my cry for help, made a comment about the nursing schedule, and just walked out of my office as if I had said nothing at all about being in extreme pain. This guy was a dick. I'm sorry guys, but I get mad every time I think about this guy. I mean, this guy was far from empathetic and understanding. But you know what? At that point, I had had enough of his lack of respect and consideration towards me. So I decided to go over his head, and I went straight to his boss's office, who was the administrator for the entire nursing rehabilitation center. And boy, I knew that was going to piss him off. But what do you do when your own boss doesn't care to listen to or acknowledge your very important concern? And you want to know the crazy part, you guys? I'm going to keep it real with you. When I got to the administrator's office, before I could get any words out, I started to have an emotional breakdown. I mean, I straight up felt like a little boy again. And I felt extremely embarrassed for complaining about my stomach pain. To be honest, that was the first time I ever cried at a workplace. I guess everything I had bottled up that day just started to overflow and got the best of me at that moment. Well, when I finally calmed down a bit, I explained to the administrator that the reason why I couldn't control my emotions prior was because of the complete disrespect and disregard from my boss due to how he completely ignored my pain. But let's be honest, it was way more than that. It was all of the BS I had to deal with when it came to my boss during my time working there. Again, I only gave you guys a brief idea of the relationship I had with this guy. But man, he was bad. I mean, horrible. Anyways, after listening to my problem, the administrator seemed somewhat understanding and actually decided to calm my boss down to her office so that he would take the matter seriously. Honestly, I kind of regretted her doing that because I never want to force someone to do something that isn't genuinely coming from their heart. But at the same time, I was kind of glad he was getting disciplined for his lack of professionalism and leadership. So next thing you know, my boss comes into the administrator's office and pretends to all of a sudden care about what I was dealing with. This insensitive and pretentious guy was really playing games. And you know what? He insisted that they call the ambulance for me, which I said wasn't necessary because all I needed was to go home, rest, and to be away from stress. Because like I've said many times before in my past videos, stress can easily and tremendously intensify IBS symptoms. It's a known fact that the human body has a natural biological response to stress. Unfortunately though, because of my condition, I just can't help that my body reacts to stress in a very negative and painful way. But anyways, back to the story. My boss kept insisting that they call an ambulance for me since he claims it was mandatory protocol, which eventually influenced his boss, the administrator, to get on his side. So now I feel like I'm being ganged up on. In my mind, I'm like, so you mean to tell me that every time someone becomes sick at work or their sickness intensifies, you have to automatically send them to the ER in an ambulance? Again, this guy was playing games and I wasn't buying it. I kept standing my ground that I didn't want to go to the ER in an ambulance. If I had to go to the ER, then I suggested that I can drive myself since I didn't feel incapable. And the hospital was literally only a few minutes away from the nursing rehab center. Even a nurse who came into the office during my episode volunteered to drive me herself, but my boss insisted on calling the ambulance. And guess what? He did. I was shocked that he ignored my decision to not call the ambulance, and I felt pressured like I had no choice in the matter. Can you imagine being in that situation? Where you're at work, you feel extremely in pain, and all you're asking to do is to go home early just to be able to come back the next day more recuperated? But instead, everyone who works with you, including your boss, gangs up on you and decides what is best for you without even having your best interests at heart. It was my first time ever being in a situation like that, and I just didn't know how to react. Well, the EMT arrived, and needless to say, I was upset. They brought with them a stretcher, which I was very reluctant to get on because I didn't want to face the embarrassment of all of my coworkers and even the patients seeing me being pushed out of the building. My insensitive and pretentious boss and everyone else in the office became very persistent in getting me on that stretcher, and I was beyond upset. I don't know why I didn't have the courage to just leave right there and then, but honestly, my boss and his boss were using their authority to scare me into doing what they thought was best for me. They really manipulated me to get on that stretcher, and I remember thinking to myself at that moment that if they try to make me do something I really don't want to do, then this is definitely going to be my last day at this job. Again, they claimed it was mandatory protocol for me to go to the ER on a stretcher, which eventually made me feel obligated to get on it. As I was being pushed out on that stretcher, I remember feeling like it was the worst day of my life. I was in a lot of pain, under so much stress, felt very manipulated, and extremely embarrassed for how my life was going that day. I blamed my IBS, my boss, his boss to some extent, but even my own reaction to that situation. Nonetheless, as soon as I got in that ambulance, I knew that was going to be the last time I saw those people and that place again. Guys, when I tell you that I felt at my lowest after that experience, man, I felt at my lowest. To make this long story short, when I got home after wasting so much time in the ER, where I didn't accomplish anything except a $500 ambulance bill, a $500 ambulance bill that I never asked for, guys. You can imagine how much angrier I got by the fact that I let their manipulation influence me, instead of just following my gut to not get on that damn stretcher. Nonetheless, when I finally got home, I decided to write both my boss and his boss a very long email as to why I wasn't planning on showing up to work the next day and thereafter. I never have and normally wouldn't quit a job without giving at least 2 weeks notice, but this was a different type of situation that clearly was affecting my health. So, I made the decision to put my health first. You know, losing jobs seems to come with the IBS territory for many of us. I guess part of why that is because stress has such a strong and negative effect on our IBS symptoms, and loss of stress seems to come with the job territory. So there's no way of avoiding it. But you know, there are only some stresses that are worth dealing with. Your family stress, and the stresses from a job or hobby you're actually passionate about. The stresses from a job that didn't value me as a person was not worth dealing with any longer. So I had to do what was best for me. So my advice to anyone struggling with a tough decision such as leaving a job or person that is negatively affecting your health in any way, shape, or form, I suggest doing what is best for you and letting that situation go without even thinking too hard about it. It's not worth the pain and agony because your health and sanity matters so much more. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed the story. Have any of you ever faced a similar situation where your IBS or circumstances related to your IBS forced you to quit a job? If so, how did you handle it? Please let me and the rest of the tribe know in the comment section below. And again, we're a tribe of supporters who not only support, but show love and encouragement, which is what I feel makes a family family. Alright? So please never hesitate to reach out to one another and connect and build relationships. You could be talking to someone from across the world who knows exactly what you're going through. You could be talking to someone who could use your unique perspective on life, because it might not only make them feel less alone, but it actually might save them from doing something very drastic. Well, alright peeps, that's it for the video. Thanks for sticking around this long. I mean, you guys are the freaking best, alright? Well, as always, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And remember, be surrounded by nothing but positive vibes. Peace.